Good day, everyone. I see all the participants entering now, and welcome to Employer Branding South Africa's first webinar today. I'm pleased to be hosting it, and we're going to be covering the topic of employer branding, proud employer brands steering talent through a crisis. So just a little bit about Employer Branding South Africa. We are a leading consultancy that specializes in building employer brands and value propositions and assisting companies with positioning their value propositions, but also training and assisting them on integrating them into their organizations. It's all very well having a crafted brand that you are proud of, but the actual integration is the most important in terms of living your brand. So that is the direction that Employer Branding South Africa takes. So the reason I've actually got these leaders together today is because I think the limelight now needs to be on the South African brands and getting an understanding with our unique nuances as far as the social, economic, and political environment is concerned. We've got our own nuances. I think we can all acknowledge that. And this is why I've cherry-picked these individuals today so that they can guide us and give us wonderful insights and input and learnings as to how they're navigating within the South African and the African environment. So I would like to welcome Dieter Veldsman, who is the Group Human Resources Executive for Metropolitan, Memento Metropolitan, Carina Smith-Allin, who looks after the communications, both internally and externally within Pick n Pay. Hi, Mariette. She's responsible for talent management and internal engagement within Capitec Bank. Now, all of these brands are really, really renowned brands to you, and I'm sure you have touched them in one shape or another, whether it was from a consumer, an employee, or a candidate perspective at any stage. So just a few house rules and just an indication of the kind of format and the agenda that we're going to be running. I've got no presentations from any of the panelists. I asked them purposefully not to put formal presentations together so we could actually hear from the horse's mouths what they are doing in this economic climate and with the pandemic still very much in full swing. Jane is my business associate, and she's from Out of the Box Thinking, and she's going to be assisting with the questions and answers. You're most welcome to chat away in the chat box. There's a lot of familiar names that I know have registered today, but questions and answers, please also put in the Q&A. We will try as far as possible to answer those questions, but should we run out of time, we will obviously get those answers to you. One request that I'd like to make is if there's any questions specifically directed to one of the panelists, please make sure you indicate that so I know where and how to direct it. I think Jane will be able to sort of field those questions coming through, but as I say, if afterwards we've run out of time, which is always the case, let's face it, I will make sure that we get back to you. So welcome again. And I'm very excited to have these people on board today with their wisdom and their learnings. Let's face it, they are in the front line of essential services and in the direct firing line in every way. And I'd like to kick off by maybe just requesting Dieter to answer this question. I think you know, for now, we've come through a roller coaster ride from pre-COVID right through to, I think a lot of companies are at recovery phase. They're trying to pick up the pieces and that, and they're trying to make sense of all of this and ensure that the re-onboarding and pulling people back into the workplace and that is not too traumatic for everyone. But in this process, there's been a lot of challenges along the way. And I would like to hear from you about those biggest challenges, maybe the top 3, and where you're at now in terms of the recovery phase, Dieter. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Celeste, and good afternoon to everybody, and to Carina and Mariette as fellow panelists as well. I think, Celeste, it's definitely been a roller coaster ride, and I think if I have to almost summarize 3 key points that I think challenges that we are still busy solving, and by that I by no means imply that we found all the answers to them yet, is I think the first one, everybody almost went into this phase around how do we continue working given the constraints that COVID has provided to us as an organization. So there was almost a phase around what does safety look like in this world, and how do we keep people connected and keep people productive. As part of that, and as part of being an essential services, how do we make sure that business continuity was really a key consideration for us at that particular point. I think we've moved on a little bit from there, so almost touching a little bit more on the employee engagement component. It is around how do we make sure in the current environment that people still feel socially connected to their colleagues as well as connected to the culture of the organization. It's the first time for our workforce of about 16,000 people that they have to work completely remotely. And we are starting to find that from an employee well-being point of view, people are starting to seek that human interaction and that human connection. And I think the challenge that we find at the moment is how do we continue to build and tell our culture story or our purpose story and get people to buy into that and continue to feel part of the organization through various, technological platforms, as opposed to seeing colleagues from a day-to-day point of view with regards to that. And then I think also, the strain from a mental well-being point of view. So I think employee well-being at the moment is a key topic for us around how are we going to build resilience into our workforce going forward. And I think really that transition where people are starting to realize that we are now entering into a completely new way of working, and we almost have to let go of the past and start adapting and planning for a sustainable future that's going to look very, very different. With remote working, we found a lot of our people initially thought it was a very temporary state of mind, if I could call it that, and we could see that around the way that they responded to setting themselves up from a work point of view. At that stage, also struggling a lot with boundaries. What do boundaries look like in this new, always connected world? And what we're finding at the moment is really the question around, but what does the future look like? And what will it look like in terms from a talent point of view around a very different type of workforce and a hybrid workforce? And how do we still create meaningful work for people as part of this broader journey? And I think those things for us at the moment is really top of mind. And to have those conversations around what does the future look like for us with regards to that.
Perfect. Thanks very much. I think you've touched on very, very pertinent points, and I'm sure Carina, Mariette can also share the same pain points that you're going through at the moment. I don't know if you want to take the baton from Dieter there, Mariette, and maybe talk about what's happening within Capitec.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, Dieter, Carina. I struggled a bit with the Zoom. I just wanted to sing the song every time it comes up. I withhold myself. Yeah, I think I can echo what Dieter says. I mean, it's this thing of it's just going to be short-lived. I mean, and then it isn't. What we did see is, and I think that was wonderful, is, that thing line managers always said, no, people can't work remotely, they can't work remotely. And just, I think it's a typical South African story, how we can, faced with adversity, how we just stand up. I mean, we've got wonderful stories how our IT guys sourced and begged and borrowed and, got laptops, and how we could move a contact center, call center home. That was fascinating. Obviously, the first 3 weeks we were locked down, but then when our branches opened, we were able to also get, all our branches couldn't go back, but the ones that couldn't really see clients, we were able to also upskill them and support them to be our call center agents to help with our collections, etc. And that, without us knowing, paved the way for a new future in terms of how is upskilling our staff and what will be this new hybrid workforce. Yeah, so that was interesting. The other thing that we also saw was because clients couldn't get to the branches, they would start demanding the digital services. So you have your book of work and all these things that are in the background and all these priorities that must be delivered, but there's always a new priority, a better priority. And suddenly in our environment, we could position and promote the digital platforms. So our IT guys could reel around that and our client experience individuals, and we could then prioritize our digital strategy. And yeah, so that was wonderful. But I want to echo what Dieter says. I mean, this whole thing about staying connected, it's quite a challenge. We thought we ran a pulse survey in the beginning of the lockdown. We ran about 3. And what we find, people are comfortable with the work environment because we could easily adapt, get them their pieces, get them connected. The managerial support was great. They collaborated great. Teamwork was high because suddenly it's a new thing. I think also this whole thing of, oh, cool, I can work from home, see I'm productive. And, you know, that's how we go. But then continuously throughout the time that we ran this pulse, is about 2-3 months, we saw that the adapting stage is difficult. And that thing of not switching off and where's the boundaries. I think that's a big thing. I think that's something we all need to, because I think we also as South Africans have a sense of we'll get through this, we'll rally together, and you never sleep, you just continue.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah, you employ people that are passionate about people, which I think South Africans are. Yes, so I think that's still something we're struggling with the boundaries.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. So I think very common ground we're all sharing at this point in time. What do you say, Carina, in Pick and Pay? Are you feeling the same familiarity?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much, and happy to be with Dieter and Mariette on this panel. I think, you know, the 3 main things that we really focused on that were challenges in the beginning, and we then realized we need to focus on it, and I think it hasn't gone away, is of course the consistency of behavior. So for us to make sure that our staff remain so engaged that they remain consistent in their behavior towards customers. Mm-hmm. And it's really challenging in a space where you have 85,000 staff members, and they across the country, they have different type of leaders in their stores from different cultures, from different walks of life. And you've got to craft your messaging in such a way that you actually drive consistent behavior. And that consistent behavior is what's going to keep customers safe during a pandemic. It's not about bringing in money into the stores. It's about the behavior that's going to keep customers safe. And for a retailer to totally change your way of thinking from profit margins to safety is quite something. I worked in the mining industry before, where health and safety was a top priority. So it kind of felt like I was back in the mining industry, where you talked safety the whole time to customers. You're talking safety to retailers, you know, to grocers. And that was a mind shift change, and I think it still is. I think the other thing that was really a challenge is leadership visibility. Mm-hmm. So you basically now have head offices working remotely. So although store staff haven't seen them regularly, support office staff remain engaged because they saw each other. And that engaged feeling needed to be there, you know, and it was important for us as a communications team to actually figure out how do you keep people connected, because Zoom is just a visual connection.
Sure. And
how do you keep them connected through empowering them with the correct messaging? Mm-hmm. That was, and lastly, I think culture and morale. Dieter also mentioned it. Yeah. There's no ways that you know, and I'm by no means saying at Pick and Pay we're experiencing that challenge. I'm just saying I think across the board, there's no ways that culture cannot be impacted during this pandemic. Because you're working in different ways, you're communicating to each other in different ways, you're connecting in different ways, and the subject matter of your messaging is different. So how can your culture, you know, and your morale be the same? And I think that will be the challenge moving back into the offices slash changing, you know, the emphasis from safety to back to making money, actually. That's going to be the challenge, to work on the morale and the culture.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for that. So I think that's wonderful, because you're coming in from a communications perspective, and, you know, communications initially, but still very much importantly, is it needs to be regular, consistent, and, you know, so communication's a big factor. Leadership is also, I think, you know, leaders and how they've had to react and how they've had to step up to the mark from a, you know, just all those soft skills and that. You cannot run and hide away somewhere. There's no way you can do that as a leader. I think if anything, that's been amplified. The culture and morale, I agree completely. It's not going to be impacted on. Initially, I think it was a novelty for everyone. And then it's like, okay, so how long is this playbook going to carry on for? I think there's a reality that sets in that says, okay, now where to from here? Because I think every individual has a recovery period as well. And sometimes the organization leaves the individuals behind. And, you know, and how do you align all of that, your individuals within your workforce, to the expectations of what the organizations are requiring from you? So it's business as usual, but there's also an element of the protective element, the training element, the leadership element, the morale, the culture, and all of those things that obviously throw quite a curveball into the mix completely. So that's all very, very good points. Thank you very much. I think it's definitely, I think everyone's feeling it, but you've amplified it. Not easy. As I say, we might be going into a recovery phase, but we are still going through a lot of managing of expectations in terms of consistency and how we manage the well-being and the financial stability and all those things when it comes to the employee well-being. So I'd like to position this question with Dieter and Mariette, because you're very much on the talent management side of things. And it's all about, you know, before COVID struck, you had a nice talent management framework in place, and it might have worked very, very well, and things were going along nicely, and all of a sudden things accelerated in a completely different direction, an unexpected different direction. And in fact, I know that companies are busy reworking their frameworks, obviously trying to speculate what the future of work is going to look like, but also coping with the people that are partially 1 foot in and partially 1 foot out of the workforce. So my question to you, Dieter, is, are you rewriting your talent frameworks? What are you actually, you know, what are you doing in terms of, we spoke about how the workplace is going to change, but we're in this post-pandemic phase. What are you doing at the moment as it involves the workplace framework and plans?
Sure, Celeste. So I think the talent management domain, I think over the past few years have already started changing significantly. Yes. And I definitely think the pandemic has brought us to a point where a lot of the things and conversations that I think we've been having in the talent domain was just fast forwarded in a very short period of time. And I do think that the talent management world and what we are looking at the moment will definitely evolve. But I think we have to be careful not just to throw everything out, given the fact that what we see now in this current environment we almost have knee-jerk reactions with regards to that. You know, there's still some really sound and solid principles that we need to apply around what does talent look like going forward, and how do we develop and reskill our people, etc. I think the question that we are rather asking at the moment is, do we understand what work will look like? And what I mean by that is to say, actually getting to the point to say, as an organization, how will we deliver work? And what will that mean? And what does our outputs look like? And then based on that, almost looking at our own talent coverage at the moment and say, how well are we geared at the moment to be able to deliver that in the longer term? I think if you engage at that level at this particular question, I think your talent management frameworks definitely gets adapted. And I think that's something that we are currently doing at the moment as well, because also your definition of what critical skills look like and what high potential looks like is going to change based on this ever evolving world of work as well. So I think on our end, you know, we do try and adapt, but I'm always cautious around adapting so quickly that you've got this knee-jerk response just to the current environment, and 6 months down the line or 12 months down the line, you actually want to revert back to what we had previously. So I think there's that balance that we are trying to look at. I think in our world, from a talent point of view, definitely top of mind at the moment is to say, this hybrid blended workforce, what does that look like? And if we are going into a world where location is no longer necessarily the determining factor around what attracts people to a particular organization, how do we leverage that opportunity on the one end to be able to dip into other talent pools or non-traditional talent pools, which I think is a positive thing for us where we are as a country in terms of providing additional employment for people that might not previously have had access to it. Your IT support engineer could be sitting somewhere in the Eastern Cape, and just be connected with regards to that, where somebody like that would never ever have considered necessarily being based in a Johannesburg or a Cape Town or a Durban environment. And I think that opens up a lot of possibility. I think the dark side of that argument, however, is, outside our own borders, I think we become an extremely attractive market for overseas organizations, especially in terms of the ability to source very critical skills that we need to rebuild our economy. And if people don't want to immigrate, but I can get paid in dollars and I can get challenging work because I'm also working remotely, I think it's a real challenge that we have to think about, almost a bit of a talent protection view that we will have to take over the next couple of months and years, because I think that is going to be important. How do we develop what we have? How do we re-gear it for the future? But also, how do we make sure that we are having the right conversations and not get stuck in our old ways of thinking pertaining to talent, whilst sticking to solid principles and not just changing everything on a single whim.
Very valid points. Thanks for that. And you a little bit between a rock and a hard place, because yes, it does open up a lot of potential for us as South Africans to find resources that we might be missing within our domain. But as you say, the skill set might be diminishing by way of others doing the reverse of actually poaching some of our good talent as well. So it's really about that value proposition, and it almost drills down to the individual value proposition now, not so much the company value proposition or the employer value proposition. And interesting, and then it obviously throws in the gig and the remote work environment and the skills on demand kind of concept, and your freelancers. You've got all of that also can open up a whole new reservoir of skills and a different way of looking at recruiting talent and structuring your talent framework as well. So yes, thanks for that. Mariette, what do you think there?
Sorry, I think we've got load shedding, so my UPS is buzzing in the background, so please excuse it.
No problem.
All the challenges I have today. Yes, I want to agree with Dieter. I think the big thing is about not to run and say, okay, now let's change everything, because we don't know what the future looks like. So in preparing this, I was thinking, and every time I would write for my notes, I would say, okay, but we are thinking about it, and we are carefully optimistic, and we are seeing how it's working out. So I think the whole thing about working from home, is that permanent or not? And it's very interesting. We've just, you might have seen in the media, we've just built a beautiful building in Stellenbosch. And we were moving in bit by bit, and we were excited. All 2,000 head office employees will be in one building. And then COVID came. And what was interesting, two things. The one thing I think our property people was, okay, thank you. So we can now, you know, those last things we still needed to do, we can quickly do that. But also our IT team that just launched Microsoft Teams, I think it was February, March, we switched it on for the whole organization. And we were still thinking, sure, what change plan do you put in place to get people technologically ready? And suddenly COVID was the change plan. How wonderful was that? So I think there's such a lot of opportunities that we've also seen. I mean, it's this thing about, is it a challenge or is it an opportunity? So the working from home, I want to agree with Dieter, we're getting employees. What's interesting with the social connection thing, so teams have said, you know, we miss seeing each other. We miss that physical presence. There's just something about, I don't know, how I walk or how I talk or something that I want to see. And so what we've started to do is like a hybrid, is to say to teams, work out the schedule and come to the office bit by bit in smaller groups. Obviously, social distancing, masks, you know, sanitizer. There's germ hotspot posters everywhere in the building. Don't go there. So that's quite cool. And I think that's really helping with a hybrid. But then we also have colleagues that are high risk, and they might never be able to, in the next 6 months, we don't know, come back. So how would you manage also that, having some people at work, some people at home? Yeah, so that's interesting. And I think also this thing about being able to work from everywhere, I wanted to say to Dieter, don't say those things, because people are then going to start looking internationally. Say, there are such great opportunities now in South Africa to work for companies you would never want to. Because we've had the situation that people, for some reason, are not so keen on Stellenbosch. I don't know. And so we struggle to get people to our head office that's in Stellenbosch. Also, retail bank, the core is there in Joburg, but we've got a wonderful space here. But what we found now, it's much easier to now employ those high skills remotely, and even remote onboarding that we thought will never work. I do think in the long run that's going to be troublesome, because people need to have some kind of contact to really get to know each other. But we're seeing that we can employ people now that would say, listen, I'm considering relocating, but I'm not yet ready. It's okay. So immediately that's also changed. I think the other thing, we've been starting to speak a bit about micro-jobbing, but also very lightly. It was just, I think, the experience of being able to have our contact center staff work from home and so easily, and all our branches, being able to get our branch staff to act as contact center staff. It just, I think, started to tickle us to say that there might be something here. So at this stage, we are considering shorter term contracts for period on shorter hours, especially when you've got high volumes. And that might be a start of something. Yeah, so I think it's about testing and learning, and yeah, but not saying everything will now be different, because let's see.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I think there's no rule book. I think we're still all learning. There's nothing cast in concrete. There's a lot of lessons that have been learned. That's our reason for having this webinar today. But we haven't perfected anything, and it's going to be lessons learned. We're gonna build the knowledge as we go along. I think what I'd like to also understand, how much sort of mobilization of your internal staff and upskilling in order to possibly take on other roles within the organization, so almost grow the talent to meet the demands. How much of that is happening within your organizations? Because I know there's quite a big focus on that as opposed to bringing in skills. I don't know. I see the heads nodding. I don't know who wants to go first. You want to go, Dieter?
Yeah, all good. Sorry, Mariette, you must jump in, please. So I think that's definitely the case. You know, Celeste, when COVID hit, we adopted a philosophy of how do you keep the most people possible employed for as long as possible doing meaningful work. Now, just due to the nature of remote work, you know, there are some positions that is very location dependent to be able to operate. And we also followed an approach around similar to what Mariette mentioned around how do we redeploy those skills differently, and whether that's permanent or for a period of time, that's an ongoing conversation as we start going through this particular recovery phase. And I think our commitment has always been to, our own employees first, around saying, how do we get you through this pandemic? Because there was a lot of fear, and I think it wasn't just in our organization, I think in general in society, there was a lot of fear around, what does this look like? I think there was a comment made at some stage where everybody now knows either somebody hit by the pandemic or has been impacted by that as well. What does that look like in terms of my future and my job, and those types of things as well? So I think definitely a lot of reskilling. I think I agree with Mariette. Some of it short term, some of it will be a little bit longer term, in terms of how do we shift around certain skill sets. And I think also even, if I'm in a contact center, doing my job today remotely is very differently. Is very different than what it used to be. And how do we get you to adapt to that? And I must say, I think something I've taken out of this is, people are extremely adaptable. I think probably your manager and leadership layer battled a little bit more than your guys that actually do, the hands-on work. They shifted, I must say, to compliment them really, really quickly. We almost had, that middle management layer, there's that thing around, I manage by walking around, the visibility thing. I want to see my people. That's how I connect. That's how I know they're there. I think they struggled a little bit, but I think, the rhythms and habits that they need to adopt now is vastly different. And we can already see that shift happening as well.
Perfect. Wonderful. Jane, I think we're a bit tight for time on this. Got carried away. So I'm gonna ask the next question. I'm not ignoring you, Mariette. I just want to move on to Carina, because I think my pressing question is, globally, there's been a lot of rallying together of communications and marketing, and working very closely with HR. And, there's always been, not always been, but sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between how group marketing and group marketing communication works closely with talent and vice versa. Can you maybe just give us some kind of idea of what Pick n Pay did in terms of sort of assisting and vice versa, your HR arm in the communication piece, both internally and externally, Carina?
Thank you. So I think I first want to say that there's a saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. Mm-hmm. And I think communications professionals globally actually embraced COVID. It's quite a controversial statement to make, but for me personally, I think COVID did me a favor in my career, because for the first time, I think communications became a key driver during this pandemic, which you don't often find in businesses. And I'm not talking Pick n Pay only. I've never found it in my career. And I've worked for 4 companies where you actually in the top 3 business drivers, when you had to ask leaders, communication will never come up. Mm. And I think that's what COVID has changed, which is incredible. We were blessed. I started at Pick n Pay 3 years ago, and the first thing I wanted to launch was the staff mobile app, which was the first for retail in South Africa. But interesting enough, the app only took off during the pandemic, because I think so what I've been saying for 3 years has really landed now, which is that you need a tool that can connect the stores with the head office without relying on the store manager itself only, or without relying on mid-management, because that person's best skill might not be communication, and you can't blame him for it. So the staff mobile app really took off from a registration point of view, and then secondly too, from a business point of view, where departments started using it better. And one of the departments that's a very good example is HR. So HR started using the mobile app to drive employee wellness, mental wellness, and it was incredible, because we could see that the 2 places where staff actually go the most on the app was mental wellness and safe stores. So it really talks to the whole thing that employees want to feel safe and secure, but they also want to know how can they look after themselves and the people around them better. So we really worked very closely with HR, and I must admit, I think, and it's really not because I work for Pick n Pay, I think we experienced pressure like we've never done before, because, you know, our president would just announce something on a Thursday evening, and from the next morning, 8 o'clock, those stores have to be locked or reopened or whatever it might be. And we only have the night to actually get posters up, to actually inform 2,000 store managers and owners. It was really crisis management to the T, and crisis communication. And I think you only realize how agile you are as a business when you can really navigate through a crisis like this. So where I think you sometimes work in a business where you feel they're not very agile, and it's not the case with me, so by the way, but I'm just saying, I think this crisis really helped us understand that South African businesses are very agile. Maybe I should just touch on the fact that I think where HR is normally struggling with consistent messaging to staff, I think the pandemic really drove that consistent behavior from business leaders to know that they now have to talk, they have to say something, and they've got to say something that is really going to connect with the individual on the other end. To talk about something that's non-related is not going to work anymore. In the past, it maybe did. You've got to now really take your messages and say, what is the person in the store really wanting to hear this week?
Sure, that's amazing. Quite profound. And I think, you know, if you're not on the front line, like a lot of us aren't, you know, from a consumer perspective, I mean, you know, I shop at Pick n Pay, you don't think about all of those aspects that come into play when the president says, okay, the bottle stores are closing down. And, you know, he tells you with like, you know, not even 24, 48 hours, and that's it. So I think it's out of sight, out of mind. You're so close to it all that it's so more prominent and evident in that. And we underestimate how important communication is when it comes to, you know, managing expectations, not only of employees, I'm talking about your consumers as well. Which brings me to the next question, which is really about the fact that we've got a staggering unemployment rate at the moment, and it's stubborn and it's not getting any better. We've got desperate work seekers out there. They're needing jobs, they're needing stability, and it's obviously impacting the livelihood of each and every individual that is unemployed. Out of this desperation, they are reaching out to companies like yourselves, and they're saying, pick me, I need a job. And it's not coming in ones or twos, it's coming in hundreds and hundreds of applications. Obviously, the manner in which you are dealing with these incoming candidates has a huge impact on your brand. And we're talking about the one brand approach, because they don't make a distinction between a consumer or an employer brand. If they're not treated correctly as an employee or a candidate searching for a job, it's going to impact on whether they're going to walk into your store as a consumer. So from my side, I'd like to understand, how are you dealing with candidate expectations and this inundation of applicants which don't necessarily fall or meet the expectations of the jobs, the few jobs that you might be wanting to fill? What are you doing about that? Because they're your customers as well. How are you managing that? I don't know, Mariette, I'm going to throw it open to you first.
Okay, so here's the team approach. I haven't been in recruitment for a while, but I'm obviously close to our colleagues there. So on the one hand, it's maybe not what people want to hear, but I mean, we do have, we've got a system that only allows you to apply for a specific job. So in terms of volumes, the system has supported us to not be inundated. So I'm assuming, you know, with friends and family, there's a lot of requests, etc. But we direct them to our websites, apply for a job, and you know, so there's not that much strain on our HR team in that regard. Again, an opportunity. We have implemented a screening tool, what we call a realistic job preview. So for our high volume areas, for instance, our contact centers or our branches, for our service consultants, where you go in and you say, I'm interested, and they say, okay, so this is what the day in the life looks like. You know, sometimes when the branch is quiet, you might have to, you know, clean a bit in the branch. Are you happy to do that? And through going through those realistic elements, you sometimes will have, you know, clients that are rude to you, and this is how you'll need to deal with it. Are you up for that? And going through that, I think the one thing is we get people that saying, you know what, man, I'm in for this job. But what also happens for the individual is they get feedback that says, these are the areas you might be quite aligned to this position, but these areas might be a challenge to you. And they can then opt in and out. So I also think in terms of a employee experience, that is something that's very positive. That's not always so easy, giving feedback, especially to masses.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that has helped. The other thing is we are fortunate that we are still growing. You would also know we've acquired Mercantile, and we're in the process of, I think November, the business bank arm of Capitec, and we are in the process of building that bank also. It's a small entity, and obviously there's now such a big demand, and so there's huge opportunities. Many highly skilled positions are available, and we're extremely thankful that we can do that. But in our communities, I just also want to mention that obviously you can't give everyone a job, but there's been such a great community effort to support people. Our branch employees have gone out of their ways in many ways, and I can actually speak another half an hour on this, how they've seen the real need in the communities, and how our volunteer program, we've asked employees, you go out and see what's happening in your neighborhood, and how people have started to support them with food parcels. And, you know, there are some areas where they've got some kind of matric farewell going, where they've supported those staff. Branches that have got a person that doesn't have a wheelchair. And there's other great examples. Where we've had one of our service consultants she started a NGO called Queue for Life. She heard that some of the people would stand for their SASSA money in the queue, and apparently people even passed away, and she just said not on her watch. And she started this handing out food parcels, and we've been able to, for every R1 she raised, we've given her R2, and this is as you know, snowballed, that she's got a number of support from other organizations as well. And that's something that even if we cannot give jobs, we could support in the communities also in a big way. So yeah, because it's not easy.
Wonderful, wonderful. Lots of words of wisdom, and I think you know, this is where technology does play a part, but I think you've almost got the push and pull mentality of saying, you know what, you're not right for this job, but this is the areas you could possibly work on. So, you know, they're not walking away with a door slammed in their face. They're given constructive feedback. So I like that idea. I think it's almost like a self-assessment tool of saying, you know what, I'm actually going to opt out. It's a good way of repelling and not taking people through the entire candidate experience journey to be dropped at the very end, which I think people are gutted when that happens as well. So manage the expectations right up front. And yes, that's what technology is there for, but keep it humane at the same time. And yeah, I love the social responsibility arm as well. Thanks, Mariette. How are we doing for time there? Oh my word, short. Can Dieter say something, or Carina, we run out of time there? Jane? I can't hear you, so
yes,
sorry.
I'm muted, but here I am now. So we have a couple of questions just to be able to ask at the end. So 3 or 4 questions, if you just want to make sure we can.
Have we got enough time? Can we move on to the next question? Yes?
Are you asking me?
Yes. Have we got enough time? I'm going to move on to the next
you can,
question.
Yeah, move on,
okay.
But we'll need at least 5 to 7 minutes at the end for our questions. If
not okay, well,
will
you just flag me down there?
I'll flag you in 5 minutes.
Okay, awesome. So, I mean, we're looking at the future now in terms of remote work. And it would be interesting to see how it's actually going to impact on the employer brand now, because all of a sudden, you know, you don't stand at the water cooler. There's a lot of people, there might be some people that stand at the water cooler, but it's diminished slightly. They're working in a remote environment, let's face it. So just, I'd like some input there in terms of how do you see this playing out? Because your employer brands and your value propositions are going to shift somewhat now. And how do you pull everyone from a remote perspective to have that, align them to your value proposition and align them to your employer brand that you've worked on, you know? I don't know, Carina, I don't know if you want to take a stab at that.
Yeah, so I can give you the company view and I can give you my professional view. That, you know, I think, so we are doing an extensive survey at the moment to try and assess, you know, where our staff's heads are at, what worked for them, what didn't. And I think it's important to get their feedback before you make decisions. I think that's the one important thing. And I would hope that companies would not make decisions about flexi hours or flexi working arrangements or full-time back at the office without consulting, you know, their staff members, because I think they are really the people who are impacted. So that's the one thing. I think my professional view is that in South Africa, I think we saw that it's working very well to work from home, and people actually trust each other that they're doing the work. I'm just not convinced, this is my own personal opinion, I'm not convinced that South African companies will adopt the European flexible working arrangements. Mm-hmm. And if it plays out in South Africa, I'll ask for forgiveness and I'll be very happy, you know, for myself too. But I'm not convinced yet that South Africa is ready to actually move into a flexi hour working arrangement.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think it has a lot to do with our social, economic, you know, the connectivity, the technological savvy population we have. You know, it's how geared up we are in that regard, and I think it's a mindset as well. So, so thanks for that. Very, very pertinent points. Have we run out of time there, Jane? Okay. Should we take?
If you want 10 minutes for questions, then this is it.
Okay. All right. Do you want to take a? I can't see the questions.
I can read them for you. That's
okay.
No problem.
Awesome. Are they directed at the panelists? Yes.
Yes, I've got who each one is directed to.
Okay. Awesome. Shall we start with Dieter?
Sure. So I have one. This is either for Dieter or Mariette. From Carolina, saying, since you talked about research, did you do any extra research with your employees recently, asking those who want and can have a flexible working schedule? Would they want a hybrid working environment, home or office, and would you or your culture allow that? So Dieter or Mariette, would one of you like to answer
Yeah,
that?
sure. So maybe I'll grab the, I think we've definitely done, and I think I want to almost tie into Carina's point, employee voice, I think, becomes extremely important when you're going through a transition, because I think the last thing we want to do is make decisions based on assumptions or based on perceptions around what we think employees want or need. So, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges we face, especially in the employee value proposition world, is, very often the people that make the calls around what we should offer is not the guys that need to have that lived experience with that as well. So I do think from our side, we've definitely done research. We're not done yet. We will definitely do a lot more, I think, as we amend and as we adapt to this new environment. So also adopted, to Mariette's earlier point, a bit of a pulse survey and a check-in type of philosophy with regards to that. And I think then it is around also, I think you're going to get to a point where personalization becomes important. And I think we will always ask the question around, people will have different needs. How do we find this thing that works for both the organization and for our employees, that provides value? And where's that point where we meet each other with regards to that? And then I think we'll deal it from there. You talk about flexibility. I think we've got a big question around, when people are working anytime, anywhere, what does something like inclusivity look like? Because if somebody's dialing in via Zoom, 5 people are sitting in the same building, 3 are outside, and somebody else is working from a third space, which could be a coffee shop or something like that. How do we manage that as well? So I think we're still exploring, definitely research-based, but definitely interactive. And we will make mistakes. We'll do a bit of a trial and error on a few things, and we'll learn from it. And I think we'll move on, I think, from our approach point of view.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I don't
Thanks,
know. Yeah, wonderful. Mariette, do you echo? Can you echo what Dieter says there? Affirm?
Copy paste. I think, yes, I think we also planned, and we did run a large engagement survey now. So we also just first going through that just to get a sense in terms of the culture. And of course, COVID would impact that. But yes, it is definitely that. I think for me, what stood out this afternoon is that whole individualized EVP, the individual experience.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Thank you.
A question for Carina with regard to, have you got any questions there for Carina with regard to the comms, the communication?
There's one for Carina here. Can you tell us a little bit more about the app, Carina, that you mentioned, or which other features for employees are in there? She said Carolina says it sounds really amazing.
Okay, Caroline, you're more than welcome to connect with me, because I can keep you busy for 6 hours. I'm totally, crazy about our app. But in a nutshell, the app basically takes everything that you would naturally have on an intranet, which is your policies, procedures, your employee value proposition, everything that's also driving your values and your culture, we're placing on the app. What we've also started doing is doing a lot of training through the app. So you can, for instance, you complete a video with training, and you can only move on to the second video once you've answered the questions correctly on the first video. And then that's a natural assessment. And then secondly, it also makes sure all our staff are trained. We have just now on the 24th of August, we launched online pay slips on the app. So because you log in with your employee number, all your info is totally safe. And our store staff can also see their schedules on the app. So it's just a very holistic way of empowering a staff member with what they need to actually perform their daily duties in a very happy place. I'm trying to do a short answer, but happy to connect on it.
That's wonderful. I'll connect the two of you. And I think it's about mobility. It's about connectivity. It's about, as Dieter said, inclusivity as well, being able to actually keep your workforce on the same page as possible. The channeling of communications is so integral to, the well-being, in fact, the peace of mind of your workforce as well. And as long as there's transparency and two-way communication that's taking place, that's top of mind. That's important. We've got time
Thanks,
for one more
Carina.
question.
Yeah, we have two more, but let's see how we go then.
Okay.
Red Davies, to Dieter, please. Do you think that the lockdown has been a true test on the validity of the employer brand proposition and the company culture in an organization? Would a solid culture not withstand the impact more so than a culture based on lip service? Hasn't this experience been the best test to expose the cracks in culture and drive strategy change?
Sure. So I think, answering that particular question, I think, if you've got a strong culture, and I mean, culture is a very broad topic around what is culture and what's a good culture and what's a toxic culture. I do think a culture that's underpinned by, a very solid understanding of why do we do things from a purpose point of view, and have a very strong, we almost refer to it as a bit of a think human first element to it, I think was very well equipped during the course of the lockdown to treat things from an empathetic point of view, even as the employer. To first think about, but where do our employees find themselves now, and how do we amend and adapt to that? I think from, culture is based on the things you celebrate, you tolerate, and you navigate. And I think in this time, it was really around, what were those things that brought joy to our employees and as an organization, and what were those moments that would matter to them with regards to that? I think one of the earlier panelists also spoke about consistency. So as an employer, how were we consistent in how we treated the challenges during the course of, the lockdown period, and what message and narrative did that tell to our particular employees with regards to that? And I mean, the other component around culture from a navigation point of view is around what are the habits and, the stories and the rituals that we have within the organization. And I think a strong culture adapts to that, so that the external environment, you keep what is precious to you, and that will withstand, I think, the test of time. It might show up a little bit differently, but I definitely think there is that particular component. I want to tie into something at Mariette, because I think it's applicable to the culture question, is I think the experiences you created for employees during this time is going to be what differentiates you in the future. People will remember you as an employer in terms of what you've done the last 5-6 months and what you're going to do in the next year around looking after them, looking after well-being, keeping them connected, making sure they've got access to what they need to deliver. And I think that's a really testing thing. I think it's going to happen to organizational culture going forward. I think this was wave one of kind of your culture challenge, if I can call it that. When things settle into what we sometimes refer to as the new normal, I think that's where your challenge lies. And that's where I think culture will really be tested to say, can you withstand this in the longer term? Crisis mode, Carina's point earlier, don't waste a good crisis. It naturally pulled people together. We are in it together as South Africans. How do we get through this? When that component is that this is now what life looks like, I think your culture will be tested there. And if your culture's got cracks in it, it will crack open. And I think it is going to be a very strong component around how do organizations and leadership think about that. And how do they get people back to the crux of what we are about as an organization as well?
Wonderful. Completely. And I think, Dieter, you know, in terms of, I think, again, it's about, we're in a time of change, and it's about how is culture going to maintain. And, we might be agile, we might have stepped up to the mark and everything, but is there going to be short memory failure on the part of leaders, on the part of companies? Are they going to continue with their personalization that the employees have enjoyed up until now? Because that's what they used to. They might not have even had it before COVID struck, but all of a sudden it brought the leaders closer to the employees. So what is going to move? Is it going to improve, or is it going to dwindle? I think that's the question that I would like to ask. Because again, that's where your cracks will show, and that's where your sustainability will come into place as well. And then that also points to the value proposition, whether you're working remotely or not. Are those needs being looked after? Wonderful. Okay.
So Celeste, there are 2 more questions, but I don't know if we've run out of time, and I can just, it's one from Craig, and so yes, what would you like us to do?
Should we take one more? We'll squeeze one more in. You want Craig? What does Craig have to ask?
So there's an anonymous question here. With the change around rewards and recognition to the employers, have companies changed the benefit offering to their people post-COVID? So that is for anyone to answer.
Anyone want to give it a bash? Carina, I don't know if you're in the REM side of things.
I'm happy to just tell you what we're doing and what's working really well in a time when the economy is really against everyone.
Sure.
So the economy is against us, and we don't know how the future is going to look.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, I think everyone's very cautious of recognition plans or reward plans that they're putting in place. What we've been doing consistently, and I know I'm using the word a lot, but I think that is what gives staff security, is the consistency of behavior. Is we started becoming very creative in how we're celebrating things in the business. And you will note that I'm not using the word recognition or reward, because that is always seen as I have to get something out of it. But we've really celebrated all sorts of things. You know, we've celebrated stores who remained COVID-free. We celebrated stores who had so many things. And I think by celebrating, you actually put an unofficial retention plan in place during a time when there's a lot of uncertainty, where you want to retain your committed staff members, but you can't really offer them something right now. They have to just believe in you and stick it out. But I think for leaders to really start celebrating the wins is what most companies should be doing, and I think that's a short-term solution. And we do it a lot through video, where the CEO or another leader would actually deliver a personal message recognizing staff personally for good work.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks very much. I think we've reached the end of our time, and I'd like to say thank you very much. I think our attendees received a lot of constructive, frontline information, good wisdom, implementable opportunities. And you know what? Talk is cheap until you actually put it into plan. I think they can recognize what you as leaders have been doing to date. So I'd like to say thanks once again to my panelists. It's been a pleasure meeting with you. It's been a pleasure having all the information coming firsthand from you. I find it so rewarding that we've got such a good talent and such wonderful innovation that's coming from our proudly South African employer brands. I'm quite a patriot by nature, so just excuse me while I have this moment. But thank you very much. And just, you know, to any of the attendees, if you feel there are leaders in the employer branding space within the South African environment, please feel free to email me, because I don't want this to be the last webinar. I want to ensure that we continue these webinars to ensure that we as a community, both in South Africa and Africa, can learn from each other based on the fact that we have our own nuances that come into play within our countries. So thanks very much, and have a fantastic day further, and goodbye. Thank very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very
Thanks so
much.
everyone. Thanks, Celeste.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Celeste.
Pleasure. Bye now.